Well, welcome back, everybody. We have a really special show today, and Dr. Bob couldn't be with us because he's a bit ill, so let's send him our prayers and good energy. But we are here today with Dr. Charles Flores. And before we have a bio that we're going to read to kind of give you an idea who this guy is, but let me tell you who this guy is to me. We've known each other, for about 10 years, Charles, and right when I was beginning to think about, integral and recovery, you were right there pioneering and thinking the same thoughts. And you have continued. We visited you recently at a treatment center that you run in Oakland. And anyway, I just think you're one of the coolest people ever. You're just so damn smart, and you've got such a good heart. And, if there's a model for integral health in a human being and in a man, it's a big brain, completely united with a big heart. And I think to me, you've always been an example of that, and you're just a real inspiration. And when I was in your clinic, I was just feeling my heart's moved, because when I go in treatment centers, I just almost cry anyway, just to see people struggling and trying to get their lives back. But the fact that you were there for them, I just found extremely inspiring and moving. And I'm just so happy to have you here. So thank you.
Charles Flores, he's the Director of Recovery and Wellness Services at La Familia Counseling. He supervises and trains in the outpatient, inpatient, adolescent, and transition to treatment substance use disorder programs. For over 20 years, Charles has assisted people with a variety of addictions, from the exogenous abuse of drugs and alcohol to the ones that stem from chemicals already inside the brain, such as sex and love addiction, abandonment patterns, sexual compulsions, gambling, internet, and workaholism. Unlike most certified SUD professionals, he is also a psychotherapist who treats the anxiety, depression, and other psychological issues that often manifest after being covered up by drugs and our other addictive behaviors. Charles is originally from South Bronx, and he has worked with a wide range of people, from teens to elders and traditional and alternative sexualities, ethnic backgrounds, and he says, and I love this, that he works with everyone from jail to Yale. So, Charles, we're honored to have you here with us today, and really look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. Charles, let me just start. Just give us a little of your background and history and how you got on this path. I think it's always fascinating. And how did you, from the Bronx to the Bay Area to a doctor to a psychotherapist to a, kind of leader in the field here?
Yeah. So thanks so much, first of all, for coming on, allowing me to speak for Integral Recovery Institute. It's this work that you've been doing there is very close to my heart, and it represents another kind of approach toward what we call recovery. Anyway, we'll get into that, but I'm really excited of the potentials that stem from that, and it's very timely because we have it's in the news, such a chronic exacerbation, which flares up on occasion. And, we've heard a lot about the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
So that's something that, whatever tools we can use and offer to remedy some of that, that would be I think it's just an enormous contribution. So asking a little bit, like, how did I get here? So yes, I was born and raised in the South Bronx, Puerto Rican. My family came from Puerto Rico, and I was raised in the the 70s and 80s in New York. So at that particular period of time, there was as they say, the fires were burning in South Bronx. There were literally, we were just heading into the crack epidemic, crime. A lot of people moved out of the Bronx, and then other people moved in. So the social cultural complexion of the area changed very rapidly and practically overnight. And people might know of in the 70s, the blackout of 1977, where the lights went out, and it makes me think of what's going on now and with these hurricanes and such, when power is out. And then there was looting happening. And then buildings were being set on fire for insurance money. So people were out on the streets. So that was kind of the context, and, poor public schooling. And then I got the opportunity to go through a program called Prep for Prep. It was brand new. We were the guinea pigs of this program, where it allowed us to get into private schools that wealthier kids in Manhattan could attend. So
how old were you when that happened?
I was about 11, 12 years old. So yeah, I tested in 5th grade, and it was practically brand new. It had been around a couple of years. And so that was the opportunity that I took at that time to get a different education and look at other opportunities. So fast forward, went through a prep school, went through an Ivy League kind of school. And then after college, I was exploring what I wanted to do. I was an international studies major, but I was finding that in the kind of work that I was doing, I was very much into people's empowerment. I did that when I was a teenager. There was a lot of work that was being done even in the Bronx in the 80s, gardens, vegetable gardens. And, it's like the Bronx was farmland before it became a concrete jungle. And so then we were suddenly using that rich soil to grow things and to create townhouses and that sort of thing. So I was big into that in college. But what I found is a lot of the people who were involved with that work, at least that was my impression at the time, that moved me. It said, they also need to do some kind of inner work. There was a way in which sometimes I was associating people who were really kind of propelled by a lot of anger and sort of about what was happening, which was understandable. But then sometimes the actions, just didn't line up with what I thought was, with a certain kind of integrity. So somewhere around that time, when I was about 23, I had some spiritual experiences, and this is how many of us get into integral. So we'll get into that. I had spiritual experiences that sort of shifted my focus more toward the subjective. So more toward the inner life, more toward, wow, if I change myself, then that changes my reality. And then when I approach things from this new reality, that impact can also reverberate outside of myself. And then I'm also, in a way, the cause of much of my own suffering, but I'm not aware of it. I'm not conscious of it.
Yeah.
So that sort of really, that year really hit me. A little bit before that as well. But and what's funny is that I didn't really have good experience. I went to see a therapist once on my college campus. And so when I was in college, I didn't want to have anything to do with psychology because I was feeling depressed over some issues. And I came into the office and I started talking about the issues. And it was a much older woman. And I was talking, and I remember having my eyes closed, and I was feeling the stuff that was coming up as our first session. And I opened my eyes, and the woman was nodding off. She was asleep. So I went, wow. I'm like, am I that boring?
That's a horrible first experience.
So I was by the door, and I slowly snuck out and walked out the door, and she was fast asleep. Like, she was totally like out. So I think there was some effort to contact me after, but I was never going to see a therapist again. So it is a really, there were a lot of shifts that occurred for me to come to a place where, gee, I want to be a therapist because my experience of that was, that, or, oh, that's right. They had cognitive behavioral self-esteem groups. I remember that. And it was just the most boring, dry thing that you could possibly imagine. And they're giving out handouts, and I'm looking at this thing. I'm going, oh, no, this is not what I'm into. So when I had the spiritual experiences, part of what occurred at that time is that I discovered what it's called transpersonal psychology.
Yeah.
There was a book called Paths Beyond Ego, which came in its new edition right around that time, around 93.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, wow, I had no idea that psychology also could deal with the spiritual in this much more direct way.
Yeah.
So that was my discovery at the time, reading Charles Tart, reading, so many, kind of famous Stanislav Grof, many writers at the time, and that's when I came upon Ken Wilber for the very first time.
Yeah.
It was just little pieces of Ken Wilber's work. And it also was the same period of time where I discovered a spiritual teacher named Sri Aurobindo, which some people here might have heard of. He was a Indian freedom fighter turned yogi and poet in the 20th century. And I know that some people know that Ken Wilber got a lot of inspiration from Sri Aurobindo.
That's right.
So that just kind of opened up my horizons. And I looked into, it happened very rapidly. I said, okay, now I know what I need to do. But then I was trying to look for the right place for me to go. It's like, I need to go to graduate school. And I saw CIIS, but then I started to investigate it. California Institute of Integral Studies, for those that don't know, in San Francisco.
Good school.
And it's a cool place, but it was 1993, and it was small, and there were a lot of things going on at the time. It was a little unstable, and I wasn't about to move out to California from New York. So I went to Fordham University, which was a Catholic Jesuit school, which you'd think, that's not a transpersonal place. But actually, with American Catholics there, they were actually quite open-minded. And I was able to talk about spirituality in that context in a counseling program, which I couldn't really do in, say, Columbia. These were the schools available, Columbia or NYU, much more kind of to the sort of the materialist paradigm that, hey, we don't talk about spirituality. Fordham was talking about multiculturalism, and so when you're dealing with culture, you're also dealing with spirituality. And so that allowed some freedom for me to explore that for my counseling psych degree. And I continued at Iona College for a specialty in family counseling. And then I went on, I was just kind of on a roll of education. So you see that I just kind of went on and on, went to the Ackerman Institute, went to, learned about Buddhist psychology also with Dr. Joe Luiso. It's a lot of mind-body work. And before I ever got to a doctoral program in San Francisco in East-West psychology. So I was coming up with all this background. I went to Sophia University, which was ITP.
That's right.
At that time. So I was on a real mission to sort of connect with transpersonal psychology as I saw it, because Ken hadn't even really identified it as integral psychology yet. That
was pretty integral.
Yeah. So it was kind of coming in. He wrote, it was SES 1997 or something like that.
Yep.
So that was the big book, the bombshell that kind of hit at that time. And I had friends at the time that were into him and were like, wow, oh my God, Aquil. It's like, it was really a sort of a explosion. And
I remember that book exploding me, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, exactly.
When you say SES, for the uninformed, that's sex, ecology, and spirituality. That's the
correct. Okay, yes. I'm not sure what our audience might already be well versed in all that, but I'll break it down a little more just in case. So yeah, it's that just opened things up, and the thing is that I got into recovery work. It was almost by accident. I wasn't trying to go, I'm going to go into, drug and alcohol counseling. That's my thing. My thing before that was really about trauma. Mm-hmm. So my first job was really working with veterans and dealing with PTSD and using, I was using at that time, neural and autonomic biofeedback. So in other words, plugging you in to see how you can change your body and your reactions and your brainwaves through meditation and other techniques. And so I was making, remember cassette tapes?
I do.
Back then, there might be some people who are like, whoa, what's that? That's a long time ago. Yeah, well, cassette tapes, we started to burn CDs eventually. But I remember the first ones were just cassette tapes, and they were just John Kabat-Zinn sort of 61 points kind of meditations. So right there, right from the beginning, I was looking at trauma, and I was looking at the biological correlates between them. That the psychological and the biological were not really separate things. That there was a relationship between the two. And I was a little out of sync. There were people. Luckily, the doctor I was into was hip to it, because basically biofeedback. It went through its heyday previously in the late 70s and early 80s. And so people weren't into biofeedback in the mid 90s. They were kind of not, but the technology was improving, and suddenly you could do more with, say, brain waves then. And so we're starting to get into that and work.
Charles, and I remember talking to you about this stuff when I was just starting to use binaural meditation technology. And this was before iAwake or any of that. And you were like, wow, one of the first people I met who was, working with addicts and everything that actually and had a spiritual practice that was kind of experienced the same thing I had. And I remember it being a real, okay, I'm not nuts. Here's a very bright, sane guy who seems to be confirming what I'm finding.
Oh, yeah, I was so excited. So I had that background, right? And then I got into other things. I learned ear acupuncture, in Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx. There was a doctor there that had a program since 1979, was training people, and were certified in New York State.
And now you're in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area at this point? You had moved there?
I moved in 2002. So right before then, I was doing a lot of stuff. I was doing the ear acupuncture. And then I decided to come out here really for the doctorate. And I knew that the Bay Area, everything I was doing was going to be 10 times more than what I was doing in Manhattan or the Bronx. But it was good. I feel like I got, I was like molded in New York to think very critically. So it's like experimentation. Yes. Check out lots of cool stuff. Yeah, man, and like have your head on straight, really sort of evaluate what you're going on, have different hats, go in different perspectives. This is before I thought anything about Ken Wilber and Aqua, because when that came out, it just like, oh, it's putting what I've been thinking a long time and sort of doing.
That's right.
In recovery, they had been talking about biopsychosocial spiritual intakes and assessments, and that was already boilerplate at that point. And I was working with Arnold Lazarus's multimodal therapy, so there was it was kind of there in therapy land, but we can sort of put it in another, like, more coherent framework and developed it a lot further, so that it's a map, it's a tool. And what I say with maps and tools, and what I tell my students at Cal State, or what I taught at JFKU, John F. Kennedy University, was, hey, these maps are as good as they can free you, as much as they can emancipate you from lockdown ways of thinking.
Yep.
That is the main. So if there's a device, a map, a psychological way where it opens you up and helps you see connections and helps you get insights, it helps you to grow, then and anything that is a map where it clinches you, where you get stuck because, oh, well, the map says X, Y, and Z,
right,
then that's a limitation of it.
Right.
And so there's lots of maps out there, lots of different ways we can approach things.
Right. The map has to reflect the territory. The territory doesn't need to reflect the map.
Correct.
So.
Right. So it's like, hey, don't get caught. If you want to learn about Ken's work, there could be, people having disagreements and fighting and all that. It's like, hey, you don't have to get involved in any of that. Just take the stuff that that's useful to you and that opens you up. And it's like,
yep,
wow, okay. And so, one of the ways that Aqua and spiral dynamics and everything that's, when we talk about integral and Ken Wilber, it opens our reality toward this thing called recovery. So I'm sure, John, you've seen in there's literature out there. There's a lot of YouTube videos and things, and where, this whole idea of, true but partial really comes up.
Yep.
In recovery.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of people that will just, take one bit of truth and make it the whole thing.
That's it.
And that's a commonplace thing, and where I think Integral really assists us in not getting snagged, not getting locked into a certain view. So I'll give an example. Like some of you viewers might have seen the videos about that addiction is not what you think it is. And, so this whole thing about the biological model is nonsense. It's all about social. It's all about
right.
nurture.
Reduce everything to the lower left, and we got it nailed.
Everything is in the lower left. So they talk about the rats and the rat lands, and they gave them the sweet sugary thing. And it's like, oh, when they had a beautiful cage with lots of stuff in it, and suddenly, oh, nobody gets addicted, right? And it's once again.
So we need to build cages with sugary things and put people in there, and they'll get better.
Exactly. That's proof, right? Rats are the same as people. Exactly.
I feel better.
Feel a lot better, right? So, and the thing is, so what's the solution? We got to make everything in society better, and about the bio. No, it's like these are different parts of dimensions of
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a valuable model, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah. No, and I read a great paper by neo-Marxists who talk about, especially about tribal people and how the dispossession, is the cause of addiction, and there's a lot of truth there, but it's also, it's a lot of other things, and so you can make very cogent, good-sounding arguments to reduce everything to this one thing, but those of us who've been in the trenches for a while and not dealing with ourselves and working with others realize you got to cover all the essential bases. And also, for example, I think a lot of people, when they start a new school or treatment center, say, I'm this type of personality, I'm a 6. I project my sixness, not sickness, maybe that, on everybody, or I'm a 7. And we just got to have fun until we stop wanting to do drugs or whatever. And then realize, there's a lot of diversity there. And then you have to really look in and deal with individual, cultural, ethnic, all the different lines, different multiple intelligences, where people are at morally, what level developmentally. I mean, there's so much that's included, and the integral back, this is such saves us years of fumbling around in the dark. It helps us to get to what really needs to be handled and dealt with much more quickly.
Right. It gets us, it can be really liberating when you take it that way. It really is something that, I'll give another example. I was just at the California statewide substance use disorder conference. So they do this every year. And there was one guy who was presenting and saying that, hey, substance use disorder, how many of you believe that it's all caused by trauma? And then some people raised my hand, and I did not. And he says, well, I'm here to convince you that all of you, that it is all because of trauma. And that's what we do. We do the reduction. We do that. It's like, it's one thing, one bullet. It's nurture. It's trauma. It's, it's there, or an approach. There's one approach. It's 12-step only, or 12-step is terrible, You're
right. Both sides of it. Or, in the spiritual field, we used to, the myth was if we just get in touch with our true nature and become enlightened, all our problems all our ego stuff will be taken care of. Everything is wrong. Decades and decades of, hitting walls and falling on our faces, and cults and corrupt ashrams and teachers that showed us, no, there's a lot more. That's an essential part, but it's only a part. You got to have that, but then you got to do the ego work, you got to do the trauma work, you got to do the positive work, find your calling, express yourself, build character. Have a healthy body. All of that stuff is just it has to be brought together.
Yeah, exactly.
You had experienced enough diversity of education and learned enough different modalities before you even discovered the Aquamap that you were able to say yes and instead of just looking at one reductionistic cause.
That's right. And I had the feeling, I'm sure John might have felt, that when that first came out, and then what happens is, like, a lot of the transpersonal psychologists started chewing on it, right? So mostly in California and all that. And I was working in New York in a different context. And so already the variety was there for me because, a lot of the psychologists and people who are working on it in California were not working with the clients I was working with. they weren't having the reality. They weren't having the diversity. They weren't working with that socio-economic class, those cultures, and all that. So they were making pretty large statements about therapy. But I said, wait a minute, this doesn't really apply here. We need to have more voices. And eventually, we started seeing with the Integral Institute, and then we started seeing with, many other that took it up and said, you know what, in Canada, let it go. It was kind of like, okay, we need to do research on this, and this needs to go on a wide scale. It needs to go in other countries. Other people need to work with it, chew on it. It can't just be in the level of theory and imagination. We have to actually apply this stuff.
Absolutely.
See what really works with people. And that's where I felt like, okay, I'm included in this, and I can actually fill in a lot of things that just other people wouldn't know because they don't deal with that, and they're not dealing with recovery and co-occurring disorders and certain populations. So that was, I think at that time, that was part of my role. That's part of why I published some things at the time, was really to say, hey, there are some other perspectives that need to be included in this, and I know a lot of people are making careers on, creating like, here, integral psychotherapy or whatever. But, if there's something that needs, this is something that's a collective project.
Absolutely.
It really requires many voices. And there's going to be a lot of variety in something as huge as integral. We look at the models and stuff, but we're going to focus on different things, just basically because that's who we are. And that's good. It's good to have the variety.
So Charles, you're smarter than the average bear. I mean, you've got this wonderful encyclopedic mind that can take and integrate. But what are you kind of learning? What are you seeing from, you also work on the front lines. You're not a mere theoretician. You're a guy that's right in the middle of it on a daily basis. So what are you finding about this kind of integral approach in your work? And a lot of it, again, one of the essential insights of integral is you speak to people on the level that they're at. And you language things that, you don't go into a fundamentalist church and talk about, the science behind all this stuff. That's not how they form their view of reality. You have to talk in terms of faith and prayer and scripture and all that. It's all great stuff, right? But it's where they're at. So what are you finding in your work from the field, from the trenches? What's going on now?
Wow. So there's so much going on. That's one thing. We're in California where they just legalized cannabis. So that's huge. There's the opioid epidemic, but we really in California are in a methamphetamines epidemic, which doesn't really seem to abate. And in fact, pretty much eclipses the, opioid, even though that's there. And there are a lot of trends in the state regarding, payment and Obamacare and lots of shifts and changes. And we have a huge immigrant population that could be very much impacted by a lot of the policies at the federal level. So there's lots of, we're dealing with a melting mix of things, but dealing with therapy, over the years, I've had many different kinds of experiences in translating or working with the idea of integral with different kinds of groups. So for many years, I worked with young people that were in there's a city called Richmond in California. And for those that don't know, it's kind of like, it's smaller than Oakland, but it was known to be one of the most dangerous cities in the United States. In fact, some people seem to take pride in that when I was working with them.
Is that drug?
In something.
Charles, is that drug-wise, gang-wise, violence? Yeah.
Murders. So
Murders.
So I was working with collaborative courts, drug courts, that sort of thing, and working with youth. And one of the things that I was doing, I was using a curriculum called ART, Aggression Replacement Therapy. Mm-hmm. So we're working with substance use, but also trying to shift their, trying to create, the term was pro-social, right? So as opposed to antisocial. That's the term they use in that curriculum. So I got trained in that, and I said, you know what? This needs a lot more meat. Like, I know that, yes, I can hold to the model and do that and be, have high fidelity. They would have loved that I did that, but there was so much missing from it that I started to add and enhance it. And so one of the groups they ran was called actually moral development. There was a group that was actually, as you got through the curriculum, there was this whole thing where basically it was a breakdown of Kohlberg's levels of moral development, but done in simplistic language. So, might makes right. That's the lowest.
Mm-hmm.
You punch someone in the face and you take their stuff. That's the lowest level. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Right? So that's the exchange thing. And then there's the other level, which is like the golden rule: do unto others as you have do unto you. So there are these phrases that sort of are supposed to help capture, even for youth, that particular thing. And then "we are the world" was the last phrase, which sounds like Michael Jackson's song, but really it was about looking at something larger than just yourself. Yeah. And so I riffed the heck out of that. I mean, I pulled so much out of it. And here are these kids that are gang or gang affiliated, and they are learning levels of development. They're learning all about they're learning about EQ and IQ and moral development and spiritual development and all that stuff. And we're working on how to apply that. How do we acknowledge and recognize the differences between them in themselves? And so, and we focused a lot on emotional development, because that was really what I think is that's the hot topic when we're dealing with recovery. Because it's true, there is not everything is about trauma, but there's a lot of trauma.
Absolutely.
There is a lot of trauma, especially with these kids. And so when you have arrested development, and it goes for generations, and that is something that we need to really focus on. I say, in a way, we used to simplify it, say, EQ, emotional intelligence, is almost more important than IQ. Really, as far as what happens in your life. A successful
life, and that's interesting. I haven't used this model, but I think I heard from Ken years ago, and he talked about, say you're born with $100 in the bank. Okay. And each level, you go from infanthood to, childhood. It takes, $25 and this and that. Anyway, things start happening, to get beat up by your brother, you get, people bully you at school. And that takes away from the, from that emotional bank account with your $100. By the time you get to your 18 years old and you're trying to make it to adulthood, well, it costs about, $83, about the minimum price to get to adulthood. And you only have like 56 left in the bank. You're just not going to get there. And so somehow you have to recover those lost funds so you can make that, that next leap into adulthood. And I think it's a really beautiful model why that work is so important.
I love that analogy. And what I've really, in a lot of my work in the past few years, has been working with things like family constellations and our familial inheritances. And sometimes you have families that are already in deficit in the bank account. They owe the credit card company.
Yeah.
You're not even coming in with 100. You're coming with a deficit and baggage from previous generations, whether they're incarcerated, they were drug users, all that stuff. So it's like, just to get to zero is an effort. To move from that deficit,
to zero is a huge step. It's amazing.
Yeah. So that's part of the work I do. So with youth, you work certain ways, right? And it's a very different approach. But you have when you really kind of hit on that emotional development, you get a lot of leverage. You really are able to sort of move ahead. When they start to grow up, they're not using the cannabis, they're not using the stuff. And I'm like, hey, you know what? The cannabis, we already know in the research, that takes away 10 points of your IQ. You know what 10 points of your IQ is? When they start to realize that, or I'm not a crack addict. I'm not a drug user. When did you start using? When they start using when they're 7 and they're 17. Oh, you've been using drugs for 10 years. That's a long time for somebody who's 17. It hits them. They're like, oh my God. Yeah. I've been using for 10 years, and all that cannabis has been impacting your brain. All those other drugs have been impacting you. And so when they finally are clear of that and they're in early recovery, and what I call early recovery is really the first 6 or 7 months. you have your stages where you're in withdrawal, the first withdrawal. Then there's the honeymoon period where,
Right.
and you're the awesome counselor, therapist, I feel great. I'm cured, right? And no, you're not cured, but you feel pretty good because you're not in withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hit the wall. And the wall is the grist for our mill, for our business, is really like, okay, now you've actually managed to go for a couple of months, and all that emotional stuff is now coming up. It's coming up. All that trauma, all the other stuff, the psychiatric stuff that was not diagnosed or you were treating with the drugs. You're covering it up with the drugs, or the behaviors, which could have been sex addiction, gambling, any number of addicted behaviors. Could be internet, could be a lot of stuff. But then that's covering that up. And then suddenly you've stopped the behavior, and then you're dealing with the underlying depression, the underlying anxiety, the underlying trauma.
And you no longer have the drugs to numb that out and to avoid that, and there it just starts coming up. It's like, oh my Lord.
Yeah, exactly. And so there, what I say to, the people I train, I said, that's a good time if you're just a credentialed substance use disorder counselor. That's a good time to refer out for therapy. That's an opportunity. It's like now for the first time they're starting to feel their stuff, and we get to an opportunity to really work with some of the underlying root causes that preceded the drug use. Some people are they use drugs later in life. You can't generalize for everybody. Some people have more severe psychiatric issues that they're treating with powerful drugs, and some it's sometimes it's trauma, sometimes it's not as severe. So the proper integral evaluation is really important, and we're always assessing and evaluating as we work with clients.
You're such a resource, Charles, but I have a question, changing this a little bit, but okay. I started actually before I went to grad school. I was working in the woods with kids, and drugs were always a big part of it. Then I worked at Thunder Road in Oakland. I'm sure you're. Yes. Yeah, and I really admired that place. Everybody was so motivated, and I love the kids we were working with. It's an adolescent program downtown Oakland, and. But what I started noticing from the beginning, we worked so hard and we cared so much that we just get fried and burn out. So much pain, so much dysfunction, so much tragedy, all of this stuff. And you're right in the middle of it. And obviously you're one of the most vital, just present people that I know right in the. How do you take care of yourself?
That's great. So thanks for that, So one of my biggest things I used to even teach about it was about counselor burnout. In this field, there is such a huge burnout rate, and it's true in mental health to a degree, but when you've invested and you've gotten a license in mental health, you try not to leave the field because you're going to pay your grad school loans. But, with an SED counselor who's done less, there are a lot of things that I've, you and I have all seen, we've seen the counselors who are in recovery that relapse.
Yeah.
So they've had a few years, or and then, dealing with these clients, they over-identify, they have boundary, they make the mistakes about boundary, and they don't do that self-care. And what I tell my, people I work with, I say, your recovery is not it's not like we used to say enlightenment, right? Recovery is not like I'm recovered and that's done, right? It's not like, hey, I stopped using drugs and now I don't have to do anything anymore, right? It's sort of like, no, it's this ongoing developmental process.
Yep.
And you can only assist your clients as far as you are assisting yourself.
That's right.
It's like that old.
And by the way, if you are a counselor and you're just all stressed and burnout and everything, and you get this young client that goes, "Oh, your recovery? I'd rather be on drugs and look like you do." So there has to be, it's like I love the people, and I think you're one of these type of people. They can look at it and say, "Well, if Charles is, if that's what a healthy life, I want some of that." How did you do that, Charles? And you have to show something better. If you're just down there with them, first of all, you just burn out. And I've been there, where it took me a long time to learn about integral practice and how to take care of myself. But you start finding you dread going to work. You can't hear another problem. You can't hear another. It's like, oh God, how did I get to this thing? And and I was a political activist. I was a singer-songwriter protesting, always out on the, trying to right the ills of the world, which there are a few. And I found me and my colleague, we just fry. Then you get depressed and cynical. I mean, or, used or whatever the problem may be. So, yeah. So how do you do it, Charles?
How I do it. So, yeah, coming back to that. And this addresses what I said earlier. It was really about, hey, I'm with these activists and they're like burnt out and they're angry and they're just like fried. And I came across a lot of other counselors who had that. I spent a lot of time doing, to me, self-care. It's like, if you're doing this kind of work, you have to go deep in the well of wellness in order to do this work at all. Yeah. Like, you can't be sort of on the surface, hey, just doing your thing, vegging out, watching TV, and kind of not, because everything that isn't that kind of deeper work, or enjoyment, pleasure, other kinds of processes that give you joy, is, potentially harmful. If you're bombarded with everything that's going on in the news, and then you go to work with that, you're going to have a hard time being resourceful when the client is in a trauma state and expecting you to assist them, or you're dealing with one more so-called, you get in the mindset, oh, another manipulative addict or whatever it is. And
right.
Now you're on like attack mode instead of being really helpful.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So I do, so getting to what I do, I spend a lot of time, of course, meditation. That's a baseline kind of thing that I've been doing for many years. Basically, I practice what I preach, because what I do, if I do sessions with clients and I promote, hey, you want to help with your meditation during using binaural technologies, if you want to use ABS glasses, whatever it is that gets you to do it, that gets your butt in the cushion and gets you to sit with yourself, that's what I promote. And because I do it. Because I've been through it, I understand the process. I know the kinds of releases that occur when you do that kind of work. I've had enough experience in that, so I'm not just the therapist that says meditation's nice, go do it. I heard it's good. Or
it's for you. It's for you addicts.
Right. Here, do some yoga. I heard there's a yoga class or whatever.
Right.
I like that. It's like it comes from a very personal place and something I use on a regular basis, and I can show the ins and outs of using technology, for example, in the aid of for the purpose of recovery. And where does that fit in? It has to do with grounding. It has to do with really sort of learning to live not on the surface of things, but more deep within, so you can get to some of those root causes, those issues that sort of come up.
And
so
Charles, do you find that because this technology allows, people the first time, you're in a deep meditative state, if you sit there for 3 or 4 minutes, do you find it helps people stick with the meditation practice because they begin to feel the power of the practice almost right off the bat than if they were doing more traditional meditation?
I would say so. It certainly was true with me when I first met you, and we were at the Integral Theory Conference, and I put on those headphones at the time, and I went, oh, I could totally go with this. This is I can see myself doing this every day. Because it's already, and you think of people who are, they go for these powerful drugs because it's like, it's right there, man. It's like, boom, you feel something.
That's right.
At least initially, not in the long term, then you're just trying to catch up. But at least at first, it's powerful. And sometimes the psychotropic meds, they take weeks to sort of kick in. So here you get something that's like, wow, all right in the first 4 minutes, you're already lowering your heart rate. You're already getting more relaxed, like stuff that you were not able to do yourself because of your monkey mind. You're suddenly able to drop in. You're like, wow, man, that's cool, and not fall asleep, because that's one of the biggest things. But earlier in my career, I tried to get them to do a meditation tape.
Oh my God. I tried to I wasn't a very good meditator myself, but I tried to get my beloved addicts to meditate, and everybody, if we could sit there for 10 minutes without, and then boom. Oh, it was just a disaster. And then, up here in my home here for years, I filled it full of addicts, every spare bed. And we have a meditation room upstairs, and people would come in. God. Finally, I started figuring, you probably need to be physically detoxed before you come in. And I was doing that myself sometimes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't wish that on Hitler. I mean, coming off of all these drugs, it's just the stuff I've witnessed. And being an empath, it was just a sitting into hell going through this stuff. But we'd start as a group, and like the first, week or two, everybody's like, stretched out on the pillows and everything. After about 2 weeks, all these people are a good posture. They're sitting on the cushions, and you could tell the practice is becoming theirs. They're beginning to own it. And we found that there was so much like anger at religion. A lot of people have been, oppressed, abused by whatever. And, very quickly in the first week or so, they go, okay, there's spirituality, religion, something else, it's related. But this is mine. I mean, this is something, deeply personal. And just to watch that happen so quickly is so bloody beautiful.
Yeah. And to tie in with what you're saying about spiritual, I mean, there are a lot of people who are told, go to NA or go to AA, and, they're not clicking with that. Right. And it's like, AA and AA has saved so many lives.
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally for that. But as a professional, one thing I explain to my clients is that, number one, that's not treatment. That's peer and social support, which is absolutely needed.
That's right.
And there is a path there with the steps. And you need to take what you can from it and throw away what doesn't work with you. That's it's a part of it. But one of the challenges, and then I refer them also to Life Ring and Smart Recovery and other kinds of supportive.
That's right.
They're not into that. If it's really too much stigma, if doing the Serenity Prayer is just too much, then okay, well maybe we need to try something else. But for a lot of folks, they get mileage with the 12-step and the higher power when they put on the darn headphones. Because they're like, whoa, I'm having a direct experience, which is what they're talking about there. It's
That's
not
right.
like some concept that is somebody tells me of a higher power, which could be a light bulb or a doorknob or like, I don't know what it is. I'm having this peaceful experience, and there's a way that I can have a direct relationship to this, that I can start to feel some of the contours of this. And so I've had clients who have just come with higher power, no way, that's not my thing, but I get something here. And there's something spiritual in this, or at least what I identify as spiritual. I'm not loading their language with it, but they'll come with me and they'll say that. I'm like, that's really interesting.
And because AA started out with Bill W.'s mystical experience when he was in the hospital, where they sent him to die, basically, and boom, that big explosion of experience of God or whatever happened in that initial phase of his recovery was the basis for all of AA. And then, of course, at one point later in his career, he experimented with LSD. When it was legal, he said, well, everybody should do acid. And they were going, no, not so much, Bill. So they kind of lost, in many ways, they lost the kind of the roots or the foundation of spiritual transformative experience, because they didn't really have a way to get there. And step 11, I was never taught how to meditate at AA meetings and stuff. And maybe if you had some recovering, Zen master or something, and you got him as a sponsor, you'd get it. But most people didn't. And so, and taking drugs is probably not the optimal way for addicts to experience God. There's some issues there. So, but now that we have, these new technologies where people can actually, step 11 become a vital part, through prayer and meditation and, in AA, and sometimes it's like, you get up in the morning, Lord, help me to stay sober today. Thank you so much. And then you go to bed. God, thank you for keeping me sober today, which is brilliant. I love, it's beautiful to pray like that, but that's not interior transformative contemplative practice where you really begin to discover higher power, not as just an idea, a doorknob, a beer bottle, whatever, but as a vital living presence that is helping you, light up and helping you face the stuff that you need to face and do the work that you need to do, an essential source of interior power. And I think that, with the work that you've been doing and, developing I Awake and these tools, we still haven't broken into the recovery world at large. And that's one of the tasks that we're in, just add the deep transformative meditation as a part of your recovery process and treatment centers and stuff, and give people a tool they can take with them for the rest of their lives, just for the interior stuff, of course, the brain, the physical brain is getting better, and your neurochemicals are rebuilding, the ones that were exhausted by the use of drugs. And I mean, you're getting more intelligent, all sorts of good things are happening, but at least give them that. And then we'll start working on some of the other stuff. But it's a huge advance in the whole field that we really haven't, it just hasn't got out there. Starting to in little places. They are beginning to do it, but it's maybe in, 3 or 4%, and it needs to be like 97% or 100%.
Yeah, and it's I think a good predecessor to look at is really the idea of acupuncture, which was used in certain places, like I was trained in it.
Right.
And a lot of people were getting trained in it, but a lot of times alternative practices don't get the traction they should or could get in community centers, and because of funding, because of where the workforce is, frankly. They're not all doing that. Many of them are, hey, I got 6 months clean, and they're getting a job because the pay is so low. Where you do see those kinds of things are in the fancier rehab centers that, maybe the Britney Spears of the world and all that. They get all kinds of, they get yoga and massage and acupuncture, and they probably could get I Awake and all that stuff. But it's not necessary for just to be the exclusive fancy rehab, or, that this is something that could be more widely disseminated, and for not a lot of money, for a lot of people that and one what I think of is when I was getting trained at Lincoln Hospital. So it's in the South Bronx, and this doctor has been running this acupuncture clinic, community acupuncture, one of the first, and people would come in for free. And these are guys with tats on their faces, and they're coming in with God knows what, women with pregnant, all that. They come in, they sit down in the acupuncture chair, and then not a word is spoken. You come in with the needles, you put it in the ear, you put the bead in the ear, whatever, and they sit there for 20 minutes. They sit there for an hour, whatever it is, and then they leave. They go on outside in their lives in the crazy world that there is in the South Bronx, which can be kind of crazy from my experience. And I asked one guy, and this guy had he's all the tattoos and the markings. I said, "Why do you come in here?" And he said, "This is the one place, one time in my life that I have for me where I find peace."
Yeah. And just saying that, I think every clinician that actually has an office needs to have a meditation room where people can come in and take that thing. And of course, it's so scalable now because almost everybody has a smartphone or some version thereof, and earbuds or it's like, that's the whole damn world, and this technology can be delivered that way. So it's not this, you need a big fancy machine or a flotation tank or, bells and whistles. It's, and my God, I've given away so much stuff pro bono for people that need it. It's not about getting John Dupuy rich. It's about getting this out in the world. So, I think we're going to have to wrap this up, but there's about a million things I didn't get to talk about, and we'd love to have you back. You're such a wonderful resource, Charles. And, you're just anyway, and I'm sure everybody who's watching this now. So let's wrap this up, and then let's talk about continuing this conversation.
Yeah, thank
Charles,
you.
I wanted to just thank you so much for being here. My brain is spinning 1,000,000 miles an hour with everything that was in this conversation. I wanted to ask you one more question here, not to put you on the spot, but you seem to think pretty quickly. So, if you could put one thing on a billboard that the whole world would see, what would you say?
About recovery, or
about recovery or practice or integral or education or opening your mind or anything you want, if you could give one message to the world on a billboard?
Something like, well, this is what comes up, I probably would come up with a better answer if I had more time. Follow your soul.
Follow yourself.
Follow your soul.
Mm-hmm.
That deepest part of you.
Yes.
Follow
And that's
that.
the part that gets lost in addiction. And what are we recovering? Well, one of the things we're recovering, and maybe for some people discovering, is the soul, that deepest part of you that knows. And that's where the individual human connects with the divine. And that's really where the purpose and the what is it all aboutness of life is discovered, you know.
And that's, if anything, just as we wrap up, you know, the thing that when I look at a client and I see somebody who's coming in who's used drugs, there's that light that, you know, we can talk about science and brain and all that stuff, but the light is not there. It's dimmed. There's a sense of a lack of purpose, lack of direction. And what I try to look for is how to light that up again. What's the thing that actually awakens that? And it was the drugs temporarily to get some sort of feeling, but to really sort of come to that sense of, oh, there's something for me. There's something that I can contribute. There's something, there are goals and things that I want, and it gets me excited. And you start to feel that sense of purpose, and you feel that sense of
hope.
That hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I say, well, if you're a counselor, if you're out there and doing that, if you're not instilling hope, get into another business.
We'll get some so you can share it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. That's on the positive side, right? So, but definitely. And I look at it's you know, there's a part of me that really, you know, thinks if I were born 100 years ago, I would have been some sort of priest, or, you know, and I would be doing some sort of pastoral work. But really in recovery, it's really addressing that part, that awakening inside.
That's it.
And that it's not like that, you know, if you're looking from recovery is recovering your life. It's recovering life, finding that thing that you are here to do and being able to live in that, but not just as a potential, but as a reality. And that's what excites me about doing this work. And I always getting back to, like, how do I take care of myself? Well, when I see the renewal in my clients, that goes a long way in keeping me going and doing more work in this.
All right. Thank you so much, Charles.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.